Hey Nelson, how are you doing?
Hey, good. Doing good.
See
How are
you
you?
hear me. Oh, I'm pretty good, thanks.
Well,
See you hear me okay and all that stuff.
yeah, and you got me fine.
Yeah, everything's coming in fine.
Right on. So, libertarianism. Yeah, I don't know. What is libertarianism? And what's maybe we could define that. There's like a
Well,
lot of.
I had a whole statement I was about to start, but
Okay, yeah,
I think that is a good question to ask before we get into everything, because the truth is that we probably both identify with this in some way or the other, but for totally different reasons. And I think we only have 40. We know we only have 45 minutes, and there's so many ways this conversation can go. But basically, for me, um, my father was very liberal, and his family was very liberal.
yeah.
But my mother's family is the opposite. In fact, I'm pretty much told that my great grandfather is pretty much like the libertarian. Like he argued, like he was really against FDR and the New Deal and all that sort of thing, way back when. But even the the conservatives, and I have there's prominent members, I should mention, of my family on both sides who are very prominent in with their politics. And one of them is conservative, and he, even though he explained to me that my great grandfather was against FDR, the New Deal, and everything, he this is kind of his opinion too, in my understanding, that because of population, um, that you can't have a laissez-faire um, capitalist system. Um, so for a long time I've really, I read Ayn Rand in high school, as well as Nietzsche and all kinds of stuff. So I've kind of I've had these ideas in my head for a long time, but maybe not just my family, but and I'm sure that you're familiar with this environment. I went to art school, and I would still work in the art community, so I'm in a very liberal environment at the same time.
I
Um,
teach it in art school.
yeah, so you probably know all about that,
I teach the math class at an art
right?
school. I get the well, but yeah, I mean, I my mom was kind of not really into that. She didn't really like that. My dad was really he wasn't into politics, but he definitely, when I was growing up, government this, government that. And then when I kind of went off on my own, I went into long, don't go into my background, but I did eventually kind of take an econ class and I got into that. And I liked it because it had a nice blend of politics and math, and which interested me at the time. And now though, I get into my dad. He enjoyed the bag ban, the plastic bag ban, right? And I'm like, oh my god, what a stupid ban. Just makes me angry every time I go to Seattle. I have to buy a bag or something. But I've argued with him. I'm like, what happened to you? It used to be like government, has no has no valid case or whatever, and now I'm like, they shouldn't ban bags. He's like, no, government needs to do this. I'm like, what? What happened? So, you know, um, little different background than yours, but I guess not too far off, maybe. Though neither one of my parents were liberal in any way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I was thinking about all the different directions that this debate could go. Yeah, I think that is important to point out. I know there's so many straw man arguments around libertarianism because we only have 45 minutes. So that's what I'm gonna call them, because
Yes,
that's what
neither
they
one of
are.
us is going to tell the other to move to Somalia, right? So,
Yeah, the whole thing. Like, we're not gonna talk about that. I really, because I really do like Ron Paul, and I really do like I don't know if are you familiar with Scott Horton at all?
yeah, the antiwar.com, I think he's
Yeah,
done
I
shows.
like him in that a lot too. Um, so I really want to avoid that, but um, are you ready to get started, right?
Yeah, so the only
Okay.
reason I say libertarian, there's like these ideas of soft libertarian, hard libertarian. What does the libertarians believe? We had Scott or David Bose came and spoke a year or two ago, and I went and talked to him, and the things he emphasized, and which the kind of things I think that some libertarians seem to emphasize are the two social issues that go on, right? I said, I just think that a lot of libertarians, and not all libertarians, I'm not saying that, but it just seems like a lot of libertarians that are, the issues they push anyways are smoking marijuana and like gay sex. And I was like, I don't think either one of those, having the government get involved in either one of those, are necessarily libertarian issues, but that's that aside. So,
but you don't think that maybe this would help somebody who's conservative understand how that doesn't really conflict with their values?
What do you mean?
So someone might be conservative, but then all of a sudden they might realize that telling somebody that they shouldn't be gay or smoke pot or whatever the case is, that they're saying the government should infringe on their rights.
Yeah, so there are conservative values that would not really saying, well, basically it's the government shouldn't be involved in telling someone. And this is where I think liberals and conservatives have it backwards, because liberals are all about more government, right? So in the past, they were very pro-war. You go to who started all the great wars of the 20th century, it's Democrats, right? Liberals. And it wasn't until the Vietnam War that kind of switched. And I say, well, a liberal is all about government needs to do this, that, and government should be, yeah. I consider it, I know we've debated on religion, and I think, statism is a religion, and it's more of a liberal's religion. And so I think conservatives kind of have it backward. Conservatives should be questioning the military and questioning the kind of interventions that the government does. And so I know a lot of libertarians are kind of, they Gary Johnson called himself fiscally conservative and socially liberal, right? And that was kind of the basic, main simplistic definition.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should talk about what a libertarian is sometime outside of this debate.
Okay, yeah, I'll let you go ahead and start your opening statement.
So yeah, I want to avoid those straw man arguments. But so basically what I'm saying is why I believe that it's ideological. As few words as I can, because we have less than 40 minutes now. So I think it's ideological basically because we're being challenged by overpopulation. Specifically, when I listen to Ron Paul talk about economics and this sort of thing, and a laissez-faire system, a lot of it has to do with the Federal Reserve. And I don't want to talk about the Federal Reserve as if it's a conspiracy theory, or if the idea of having a central bank is a bad idea, or even if the Fed is good or bad. I don't like the Fed, actually, but liberals who will get confused about this, and so do a lot of conservatives. But the thing is, I don't think that because we have this population problem, I don't think we can not have a central bank, basically. I'm not saying that it has to be the Federal Reserve or that has to be whatever central bank. I'm just, for the sake of the argument, it's just that I think we're going to have the fiat currency or a central bank, if we like it or not, because I know that left libertarians, or the Noam Chomsky crowd, this is one of their big things. I don't know if you've ever heard them use this talking point, but because I know that you know a lot more about economics than I do, and I'm not an economist, and you are, and I don't want to pretend to be one. And I think that's another problem with this discussion, is that so much of it's about economics. And I know that you understand economics, but I don't think that the majority of the people who express it this way and talk about it this way are economists. But anyway, so Noam Chomsky, who used this argument, and so will the left libertarian crowd, that Adam Smith believed that markets work best in a society with absolute liberty. So he would be the person who's would be cited for a laissez-faire economy. He believed that the conditions had to be met, and I know that Adam Smith argued that the more people you had, the more opportunity you had for business, and that's one that comes up a lot. But the truth is that Adam Smith believed that the conditions had to be met, and he also believed that that it wasn't fair to those workers. And less words. I mean, that's when I say that, I mean the theory. I'd have to look to reference it specifically, but the theory here is that you have 5 workers to 1 entrepreneur, and that those workers, because there's an abundance of them, you only really need about a third of them, and they're only worth in pay and the capital that they'll receive. It's only about half of the capital. So I'm just going to go on. So basically, I'm not against capitalism. So I'm not arguing for socialism or communism or anything like that. But the thing is, and this is really the main argument, that is that I believe money is a resource. So we can't. So if we're facing a problem if we're facing a lack of resources, I don't think that money can solve that problem. What's good for business isn't always the best decision. And I think there are cases, though, because we are talking about supply and demand, and if you've heard me on here, I've actually used that argument that free markets, because of supply and demand, in some cases, like the drug war was the example that I used, is a good thing, and I do believe that. But the thing is that the reason that the drug war is so bad is because of all those poor people, and because there's more poor people, and then so there's more incentive for them to commit these crimes. So obviously, freeing the market would take that incentive away. So, but that's only because of the lack of resources to begin with. So it's not. It's you're trying to solve the problem more than. We're trying to fix the problem, I think, more than solve it there. So when I say, so basically, we want to look at some statistics. The statistics that I'm using, I'm saying that right now we have about 7 to 7.5 billion people in the world, and we are expected by 2100. There's a 70% chance that by 2100 we will be at 9.3 to 10.1 billion people. So there's an increase of about 3 billion people, and there's a lot of different scientists. We only have 45 minutes, but basically, depending on which scientists you ask, the Earth can hold about 4 billion people, would be the low estimate, and the high estimate is 16 billion. And I'm not trying to say that we need to go and inhabit Mars. And I know some people think this is going to level out by 2050, but by that time I'll be retired, and the chances, the greater likelihood is that that's not going to happen, and I'll be retired by that point.
I know. Sorry to interrupt. I know Hawkins says we're going to be gone in 100 years, and we need to populate Mars. I was just listening to an interview with Dr. I forget his name. He was on Eyes on Washington last night, and he was kind of laughing at that. And one thing he said, why Mars? Mars is like one of the most inhabitable planets. It's cold. It reaches a high of 70 degrees in the summer, but usually it's like 100 below zero. And it's just like, what is the fascination of Mars? Why not the moon or something? It's a lot closer, but anyways.
Yeah, I saw that article too. And yeah, I'm not trying to tell people that doomsday is going to happen here.
You said 50 years.
Yeah.
I think you said 50 years a while back. Or no, 500 years, I think. Now he's like, he's a sensationalist. He's got to sell his book, I guess. Pay for his computer.
So, yeah, probably.
Okay.
And then so I looked into some possible counter arguments to see what other people had to say about this, and it was kind of hard to find anything. The only thing I could really find was from the Mises Institute, and it's by University of Wisconsin professor named Julian Simon, and it was written back in the 90s.
Yeah, so Julian Simon made a bet with Paul Ehrlich. Paul Ehrlich wrote The Population Bomb back in 1970 or so. And he went on Johnny Carson 22, 23 times. He was really popular. He said, we're all going to die. India was going to be going to massive famine mode. They had about half the population they do. We were about 3.5 billion people on Earth back then. And he said overpopulation was going to cause mass starvation, famine, war, yada, yada. And Julian Simon was the famous economist that argued with him and actually made a bet on 5. He said, okay, Paul Ehrlich, go pick 5 elements or 5 resources that you think will become scarce and the price will go up. And anyways, you can get it. It's called The Bet. Planet Money did a thing on it, but Paul Ehrlich got his ass handed to him because he was just kind of I think a clueless on the ways that humans innovate, and that's why Simon crushed him. I won't go into it. It's a long detail, so I'll just say that. But yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to shorten this since we don't have that much time, and I appreciate your patience. So I'm just gonna go ahead and summarize a lot of what he has to say. Is that how the free market can solve these problems? He goes back to Adam Smith, who as I've illustrated, actually kind of felt the same way that I do about this, that the conditions would have to be met to have this free market, and that they can't be met when you have too many people. But he makes this argument that because it's good for the entrepreneur, and he cites Adam Smith in theory that it is in his theory, because it will increase transportation, because you'll need to build more roads and you'll need to produce more food and all this sort of thing. But the thing is, what we have to look at, and this goes to an article I found in the Huffington Post that couldn't help but to find very interesting, is that the majority of these people live in Africa, and they live in a desert, and they don't. So when he says that that they'll create that capital will, because of capital, they'll be able to create technology. They can create better ways. They don't really have the ability to do that. They live in this big desert. They suffer from malnutrition. They don't have any resources. That's the majority of these people. But the interesting thing with this article is that what if we had an experiment where you had another desert that didn't have a lot of resources, and it was in between 3 continents, and over the period of 50 or 70 years, 7 million people moved there, and what happens? Well, what happens is that out of 111 mammal species, a third of them are either endangered or critically endangered. And almost all the amphibian species are gone. And this country, they don't have a problem with capital. They're very educated. They're smart people. They don't have any problem with capital. They've got plenty of education and capital. They have the best technology there is. So, and they do, and they develop the best technology there is. But they can only feed 45% of the people with this technology. So the technology that this guy argues for, it doesn't exist yet. It hasn't been invented. And I don't know, I've talked too long already, so I will go ahead and let you go.
Well, so you mentioned a lot of things there. I wrote down a few of them. Like Adam Smith and he was a moral theorist, right? He was kind of the first economist, but he was really a moral theorist. He wrote against mercantilism. I haven't actually read the book, but he came up with a lot of brilliant economic ideas. He wrote them down. People had already sort of thought of them and had applied them, division of labor and all that. But mercantilism was, and that's really, I think, what his book was about, is government control. Why are nations? It's an inquiry into the cause and nature of the wealth of nations, and why are some nations rich and some poor. And what he found is that wealthy nations are, because at that time people thought, oh, it's these Africans, these black people, or the dark people, or whatever. They're mentally unfit. But if you look at historically, that's absurd because they ruled the world for different periods of time, and it just happened to be that, you know, that Europe ruled the world for this period of time. And so other things were geography, and all those things can be blown out of the water. And what Adam Smith found is that it's when government gets out of the way, right? You release the human ingenuity, and people can find new technologies, and you can invent the plow, right? The late 1800s, you have John Deere invents the modern plow, and really food production skyrockets from there. You find oil. Now we have tractors, and we have one man plowing a couple thousand acres, and you see the increase in food production because of productivity, which gets into the idea of overpopulation. There's kind of what they call the natural rate of population, that as nations get richer, they start to have less children, right? So you look at the United States, or you look at Europe, they're actually a shrinking population. Japan is a shrinking population. Really, the only nations that are growing are essentially second or third world nations. And so that's actually a problem in the West, is that Europe is shrinking. The United States is basically at maintenance. But anyways, as the nations get richer, their population starts to kind of level off. And so there are estimates that, yeah, the world's going to level off at about 9 some billion people. Now, the issue with some of the African nations that cannot feed themselves is it's not really a lack of resources or a lack of food production or anything. It's a lack of distribution, right? I think the key problem with a lot of these nations is the distribution of food, and of course the incentives involved in growing food. So you can look at nations that were once rich and produced excess amounts of food, like Zimbabwe, and then you get a communist dictator comes in, supported by the U.S. government. Another side note, but he comes in and he steals the land, right? So he destroys property rights. He takes the land away from the people that had an idea of what they were doing, and he gives it to the local indigenous black population, kicks all the white Europeans out. And I mean, not getting into where they got the land or anything, but just that they knew what they were doing, and he gives it to people. Now, I mean, for instance, let's say that they in Ohio there, right? You're in Ohio, I think.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Columbus.
Yeah, so, do you know anything about farming?
I actually know a lot about farming. I live on 8.5 acres.
Okay, so that's a bad example then. But most people in the city, right? You give them a farm, they go out and they say, "What is this?" And you say, "This is where food comes from." They're like, "Oh, I thought it was from the grocery store. I'm confused. I don't understand this at all." Right? They don't know. So if you were to do that in the U.S., you were to take the land away from the farmer and give it to the city dweller. He's an incompetent idiot out on the farm, right? Like me. I don't know much about how I would farm. My dad has a farm. Me and my brother don't want it, right?
Good for you.
We're not really interested in inheriting. But anyways, but that was the problem with Zimbabwe. That's why they collapsed. Of course, you know, Mugabe went and killed a lot of people, and he's your typical dictatorship. But tons of food go into Zimbabwe, and where does it go? It goes to the government, and it's not distributed. Right. So I mean, that's the real problem with Africa is their governments, their distribution abilities. It's kind of laughable. People say, "Oh, you should don't eat a meal and save a child in Africa." It's like, how? How does that work? It's ridiculous. But that's the simplistic nature of human thought, which gets into my belief in why libertarianism cannot be achieved in our lifetime. It's not necessarily because of overpopulation. And I can kind of, like, I'm saying that I don't believe in overpopulation. I think there are natural rates, and the earth has a carrying capacity of whatever population happens to be on the earth, as long as you allow humans to do what they naturally want to do, which is produce things, right? I'm a supply side economist, but not because of overpopulation, but because of ignorant population, right? People don't really know much of anything outside of their own job. They think they know everything about economics. They think they know everything about politics, but nobody really understands even what they believe, and nobody can provide a defense for what they believe. And so I think the problem that reason we won't have libertarianism is well, I'd say go watch, there was a debate here about several months ago between two people about whether or not government is necessary or something like that. And the guy that was saying that he was the anti-libertarian, I guess, side was basically saying, well, I look around, we have government and we're pretty prosperous, therefore, right, government must be good. And I think that is really the limit of most people's understanding of government is we have government, I have money in my wallet. Yeah, I guess government is really good, right? And it's necessary. So I think that's the real problem with libertarianism, why we'll never achieve it. And I won't, I won't get into, we don't have to get into money or the drug war necessarily, but the problem with the drug war is black markets and, right, there's no legal recourse. Yeah. Yeah, so you bring in the gun. I was like, I can't take you to court, so I just shoot you, right? And that's how it works in Mexico, anyways.
The thing is, so when you talk about the distribution of resources, that's interesting. That the government, they might not be helping those people, and they probably aren't. But here's the problem here. And it's kind of the cliche argument, because I know a lot about this is transportation. Who's going to build the roads?
Roads, right?
Yeah.
Roads. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of jokes out there. Well, North Korea has really beautiful roads, for one, right? But they don't really have anything else. Their government now literally they are slaves. I mean, literal slaves to their government. Their government works them, takes the wages, and then converts it into North Korean currency and pays them in North Korean currency, which doesn't really buy anything, right? Nobody accepts it around the world. So, but the roads, there are private roads, and they're typically toll roads. Stossel, years ago, I watched one of his videos. He went to, I think, Brazil, and they had a private road that was well-maintained. Then they had the public road that was extremely dangerous. Now, we're not quite to that extreme in the United States, but we do have private roads. I mean, the Turnpike, I think, is a private road. And I believe the Chicago Skyway has become a private road. And there's some other issues with how that occurred. But I know I drove a private toll road in San Diego last time I was down there, and it was a nice freeway, And the way technology is, it makes you don't have to stop at a toll booth. You still do on the East Coast because they're not very competent out there, apparently. I don't know what their deal is. But.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I think about Brazil as compared to the Saharan desert in Africa, I think Brazil would be a much more fun place to go.
Well, Brazil is a basket case because they're a heavily socialist country, and they're I think the World Cup and the Olympics will kind of be the same thing that broke Greece. That's basically what happened to Greece. Is they're a socialist country, and then they have these massive events that cost them a lot of money, and that was really what broke the back. I mean, they were already in a lot of trouble, but I think Brazil, the BRIC countries are. Boy, I used to believe in the BRIC countries, and I don't think so. I think Brazil is going down. Russia's not doing very well. So anyway, but basically, I'm saying that their private roads are built in certain areas, and if you allow them, the problem that you come up against like the U.S. is if you have a private and a public road. We have a bridge out here. We have a toll bridge and we have a free bridge, and guess which one most people want to use, right? A lot of people will drive around the lake. I did that for a while. I finally gave up and bought a good to go pass rather than spend an hour in traffic. So but I try not to use it, right? I try to avoid it at all costs because I don't want to pay the government money because I think the whole system they have for that bridge is screwed up. But I would prefer to go an extra couple miles for free than pay $3-4, right? And so that's kind of the problem you get with private roads versus public roads. It's like private and public schools. If I can afford the private school, I would send my kid there. But, why do I have to pay for both? So,
yeah, I agree with you on that. Why should I have to pay a toll for a road if I'm already paying a tax?
Yeah, yeah. Already built the road. Now I got to pay for tolls for it again. So.
But that would be, I mean, that's one of the problems that I see illustrated in this debate is that cities are growing. I know Columbus is actually one of the most rapidly growing cities, and so you have problems with transportation that rise in cities. So I mean that could be that's kind of part of the problem is that people talk about privatizing roads, but it almost becomes like that. That's like an additional tax I have to pay unless I don't have an hour to sit in traffic. Another hour to sit in traffic. So
I think of cities, Seattle, for instance, I know because we have toll express lanes here and 405, and the DOT came in and they built an extra lane and they made it into a toll lane so that you have to have 3 people or you can pay a fee, and the fee is according to how many people are in the lane. It's supply and demand, and it peaks like almost every day. People are willing to pay a few bucks to use that road. And if there was a private company that were allowed to build a road next to it, I think that they could make a pretty good profit. But the problem is that you have eminent domain, and government can come in and build a road and use eminent domain and all that, when a private company would have, I don't think it's even possible for them to come in and build a freeway next to this freeway, even though it's necessary because traffic here is, oh God, it's awful.
So. And that's one that that's the contention that I think really extends itself greater into the argument, because people would make that argument, like say for the rainforest. Well, if we privatize the rainforest, we wouldn't have the problem of so many problems with deforestation and that sort of thing. The thing is, though, that someone would have to come in and privatize it, so the government would have to come in and privatize it. So it's intervention. So that's not really libertarianism either, or it doesn't really fit into the way I understand it. Doesn't really fit in.
Well, I guess if you were in a libertarianism, you would have private everything, and again, I think the issue you're going to come against is what we saw. I saw that I think President Trump was going to talk about privatizing some of the park service. And what do you think the headline was? Trump wants to develop the sequoias, right? So if he's talking about having a private company run the redwoods or something like that, then the left just comes in and says, oh, he wants to cut down all the sequoia trees and turn it into a theme park or a big hotel. And it's really absurd, but that's what people believe. That's what people assume about privatization. Stossel did a thing on private parks, privatization. He did a show on it. And I've been to Bryant Park. I used to hang out there in New York City, and I had no idea. It's a private park. It's a privately run park. There's privately run libraries. There's private, nobody knows, because they can't tell the difference, except it's prettier. It's much nicer, and it's much cheaper run. Bryant Park is beautiful. There's thousands of people there at lunchtime in the summer. And it's privately run. So, but people think, oh, privately run, that means you're gonna have to pay a fee to get in it, and it's like, no, it's just that. So that goes to my belief is that it's not overpopulation, but ignorance of population. The people don't really know anything about much of everything, and in your common case, right? So I live in Seattle. I know you think it's all artsy and stuff, but Seattle is. I'm even in a running group. We get into arguments all the time with Seattle is the most extreme left city maybe in the world.
More than Columbus.
I don't know.
More than Columbus.
Huh?
Columbus is pretty.
I guarantee.
We're the largest university town in the United States, so. Columbus.
Well, I got Eugene. Eugene is. I actually like Eugene because I'm Tracktown USA, and it's kind of cool, but it's small and it's kind of relaxed. It's a hippie town, but I never got a sense of Seattle was a big town. It's big city, but it's also got the protesters. We have May Day riot. We invented the riot, right? WTO riots.
I remember that.
Seattle invented that.
I remember that.
So now we have that. Yeah, exactly. So that's May Day. That's Cinco de Mayo. They have these marches. You know, we had these massive women's march, and of course they leave their garbage all over because they love the environment so much. But
my understanding is
sorry,
why there's so much music and culture and art and all that sort of thing in Seattle is that we don't experience this too often in Columbus. We do sometimes, but it's more often that you have days on end where you just can't go outside, and you have hours that you have to spend inside. So people, they spend those hours, getting involved in those hobbies and projects, art, and music, and that sort of thing, and that makes sense to me.
I would think that would be more Columbus, because Seattle, yeah, it rains, but you're never stuck inside. We have actually, of the top 50, the 50 large cities, we are 50th in weather extremes. So we have the most common, what do they call it? Least extreme weather in the United States. So weather never really stops you from doing anything except it rains. People can't drive, obviously, but that happens everywhere.
Oh yeah, I've never been out there. So, I have a few friends out there. Yeah.
Well, hey, Mises is coming this Saturday, so if you wanted to come to a Mises Institute, message me.
Yeah, basically, I don't see how the market has solved these problems yet.
Yeah, so I which problems?
Well, maybe that's a lot of what Julian Simon says is that the market will fix it. He uses Adam Smith, and all about Adam Smith and the idea of the invisible hand, and that maybe people don't know who don't know or are watching this whole idea of the laissez-faire economy. we all learn in high school that it's his idea. That it had to be met. That it had to be met somehow, and that it couldn't be met if there were too many people. But so the examples are that in Africa there isn't a transportation system. That he's saying back in the 90s when he wrote this that there'll be transportation could fix this, but that still hasn't happened. And the other thing is he says that technology will fix it because people will have the incentive to invent these things, but that hasn't happened either. Even when the people they have the best ability to do it. Maybe they have much more ability to do this than say someone in the Saharan desert who suffers from malnutrition and there's no resources there, just a big desert. These people actually they know these things, and they're working their hardest to figure them out, and they have the best technology, but they can only produce 45% of the calories that their population needs still, and they have the best technology. So those things still haven't happened, and I'm just gonna, in the 25 or 30 years that since Julian Simon wrote that.
Yeah. So the issue with Africa is probably the richest continent on Earth. I mean, they have diamonds, they have oil, they have really everything. But so why are they so poor? People say, oh, it's colonization. No, it's because their governments are so corrupt, right? I mean, they have kind of it's like India has a lot of potential, but a lot of people in India, their system is so corrupt that they're purely bribes everywhere, right? That people just have gotten to accept it, and nobody really wants to change the system. I think Africa, the problem there is that their governments are so corrupt because it's not, you don't need resources. Look at what are the two, think of some of the richest nations on Earth. Singapore has 5% of, whoa, see that thing flying around. Singapore has 5% of the world's wealth. Right? What is Singapore? What resources do they have? They're a city-state on water, right? They don't have anything, but they're free. They're economically the second freest nation on Earth, and people see that and they want to bring their money in there, and so they're extremely wealthy. And Hong Kong as well. This is Milton Friedman does in his Free to Choose. I think he talks about Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is a rock. It's really there. There's nothing there except now you go to Hong Kong, and I've never been there, but it's massive buildings everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's just people. They don't grow any food. They don't have oil. They don't have anything except entrepreneurialism. And John Stossel calls it benevolent neglect is what they used to call the Hong Kong system, is that the British government would leave them and say, hey, no, do whatever you want. Live, die, we don't care. Just they probably taxed them a little bit, but they said, just go do your thing. And the Hong Kong citizens said, thank you very much. And they went off and got rich, right? And so that's really the key, is that you need to be economically free. You need freedom, economic freedom. And that's what Adam Smith was getting at in his book. That's what creates wealth, is the ability, leaving people alone. And so, but we'll never get libertarian. That will never happen. I agree with you. That'll never happen because the majority of the population doesn't want to be left alone. They're fearful, they're risk averse, they think government is necessary. A lot of them worship government. They see government as God. Government provides them with all the goods and services that they need to exist, and so government needs to be there. In fact, should be bigger. Yada yada yada.
When I think about Singapore or Hong Kong in comparison to Central Africa and the Saharan Desert region, it's trade and how they're placed in global trade, how the positions of those cities, the trade that goes through those cities. We're not seeing that, and these other regions, and even and then in the other example where the people have the technology and the capital, they also have a really good strategic position, but even though having that resource of capital, it still isn't solving the problem of not having enough resources, because they can only provide calories for 45% of their population with the technology they have.
Well, again, I think it's not the technology problem, but the way that they distribute, the way that they're allowed to use their land. That most of them lack property rights. You can't start a business. And I think in Egypt a few years ago, I read in one of the textbooks that it takes 9 years' salary of the average person's salary to get the licenses to start a business. So who's going to be able to sit and save for 9 years? Francis de Soto did a thing on Peru, which I know it's Central America or South America, but same idea applies. And he paid 2 people to go get the necessary business licenses to start a legitimate business. And full-time, 40 hours a week, it took them 9 months to get a license, right? So nobody can ever, all you can really be is a little street cart, and you can never grow. And so that's what goes on in Africa, is nobody's allowed to do anything really. And if you do get a little big and a government official comes, oh, you got a nice house here, I like your little business, think I'll take over. Or they send in the bulldozers or whatever, So nobody really wants to get big because they don't have the legal right to grow. And so that really inhibits everything that goes on. Maybe this is a circular problem that you'll never get rid of government because government is too big to get rid of, and it'll never allow itself to be gotten rid of, or something along those lines.
Well, I think I'll go back to what a left libertarian would say, like the Noam Chomsky, what they would say about that is that that there's problems with government, but that won't solve everything. Because it's good for business, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's make a good point that big business wants government as well because it helps protect their interests, right, from competition.
But they rely on each other. So, and I know that's a big libertarian argument, but it can kind of be a left one as well. But, yeah.
Yeah. So I think perhaps you could say libertarianism, somewhat like communism, will never work in a large population because communism works with you have a few people and they're always free to leave. But once you grow, then people don't want to work, and there's only the stick left, right? Maybe libertarianism is a similar idea. As it works. Yeah, I think Liberland or something is a small country created on this between two countries. Or something.
Well, the thing that's kind of